All right, so welcome back to Dark Valley. We just completed the fourth turn, September 1941. um, Victory points. So there is October, November, and December of 1941 are left. The campaign game victory says that if the Germans at any time in 1942 don't have 28 victory points, it is a Soviet victory and the game is over. Which means I probably should be a little more aggressive with the Germans. However, using this movement in circle and trying to cut these things off takes an extra turn usually to do it, or that I'm doing something wrong. You got to get the units isolated and have a combat unit adjacent to them in order to eliminate them in the attrition segment. Now, supply, you have line of supply and line of communication. All right. Line of communication can be any number of hexes back to a supply source. Or, in case of the Russians, railroads or roads off the east or the east or the southeast part of the map. Germans back into Germany. And like I said, that can be any number of hexes. So these units down here keep avoiding isolation. And how they avoided isolation was during the mandatory counterattacks that the Soviets had to make, they were able to reduce the steps on that unit right there, who on his other side, he has a hexagon underneath his strength, which was admitting a zone of control around him. So when he got defeated or he lost a step, he no longer has a zone of control. And of course, these two units in here don't have zone of controls either. So they were able to trace their supply or their line of communication back down through here, around by Odessa, and then out the other side. That's, of course, before or through here. All right, and then out past that unit because he has no zone of control, and then down here because he has no zone of control, and then off the map or to the end of the map. So they've hung on to just being out of supply. You can't eliminate them that way. Now they suffer a -2 die roll in attacks, and if they attack and if they get attacked, the Axis get a +2. They can only move 3 movement points each turn out of supply. Let's see. A couple of German units out of supply. That'll be corrected here shortly. All these units here are out of supply because they can still trace a line of communication out. The Germans weren't quite able. They were able to cut off their supply before a hole got broken open here. So... And in the attrition segment, you're only checking the isolated units on the last phase. Let me pull that over here. All right, so yeah, the attrition segment is to recheck the status of isolated units. That's the last thing you do before the victory check segment and the turn advanced. Logistics chit is where you check the supply status of all your units. So they can either become out of supply or they become isolated. The attrition segment is where your isolated units, if they're still isolated, they get removed. They get eliminated. Okay. Quick look at the casualties. You notice the numbers are starting to dwindle a little bit. The Russians counterattack, the mandatory counterattack, they rolled 12. They had to make 12 counterattacks. A couple of them were successful. Most of this here was from them losing those. And then there's the isolated units that they lost. It's getting smaller each time. And one German unit, of course, they probably had some step losses in here too. All right, let's take a look at what's going on. All right, so Odessa is still encircled by the remains, but they're going to need more to attack that. Of course, they get supply coming across from Sevastopol or Sevastopol, however y'all say it. Venetia has been taken. That unit as a matter of fact, that unit got isolated. There were 2 infantry armies in there. 5. So it was 10 strength points in there, but the Germans didn't have to fight them. Just they got them cut off, and then they isolated them. These units have dwindled down a little bit, but you know, eventually they're going to go away because they're really not very effective. There are a bunch of 1s or 2s in there. I've got head to the city defense since Kiev, which the Germans will move in and take it this turn. Okay. The city defense marker gets moved since it was a combat that they lost to, or though I'm sorry, those units were isolated. That went back here to I moved it back to Kharkov, and that's where I think Zhukov is. No, Stavka and Zhukov is up here. I got to get those guys forward so I can use these. And I've got units in reserve over here, which actually I did use one. In fact, I taught myself how to do it and realized it does serve a purpose, because wherever those headquarters units are on the board, when you play that chip, which the Russian player, or chip, the Russian player can, that's not a draw chip. He plays it whenever he deems it's necessary to play it. And then you roll the dice and you see how many units you can pull out of here. Now, somewhere in the reinforcements of the game, there are units that are mandatorily go into that box. So it's like they come in as reinforcements and they go right into the Stavka reserve box. So, but now I understand that purpose, that Stavka or Zhukov, those reinforcements coming on, if you have those headquarters, and when they come on, they can move, okay? Move and go right into combat. Only those units, though. But what a tool to have to, like, fill a pocket real quick if that headquarters is nearby. So, yeah, that's somewhere online that's going to come in handy. The Germans are around Smolensk. They're trying to, they're probably have to encircle. They've taken Vitebsk, all right? They're really not taking the losses because I'm not doing a whole lot of combat. I'm doing mostly encirclement. Up here, 4th Panzer Army, they cut off 2 5-strength infantry units, and they ended up being isolated and removed. And went up and took Tallinn, so there's another victory point there. All right, so the Germans got a large mass up here headed towards Leningrad. Right now they got the numbers. I think that's probably going to start changing because the Soviets start getting a ton of reinforcements, and in 1 or 2 turns they start getting some air power in here. And the Germans don't really have any major reinforcements coming, just little one unit here, 2 units there for a few turns. But they're making headway. The supply units, they're moving up. Okay, supply unit up here. And like the Germans can trace 7 hexes to a supply unit, and they'll be in supply. And enemy zones of control can negate that unless a friendly enemy zone of control is also in that hex. And like I say, you don't lose them. If they get hit, you just move them back along the rail line to safety. Moving the air units forward. Can't really get this air unit. Couldn't get him any farther up, but he'll probably go up somewhere in here on this next turn to help give some air support up in the Leningrad area. Still, you know, I'm working on that hole right there. I got some units coming forward. We'll get more reinforcements this time. Something else too I need to know is the reason you have the city defense markers, like right here in Kharkov, is I got to check the turn. All Soviet cities are treated as towns for combat purposes unless they have that city defense marker. And then there's a certain turn where all cities become normal. They all act like cities, and you don't have to have that marker on them. Let's see. All right, you see the Germans here have broken out. They got to take some objectives. They got to take some victory point locations to get that 28. They are now sitting on 21 right there. All right. And like I said, we're getting ready to start the October 41 turn, which is a mud turn. And I need to do some rule reading on that to see what the movements are, because I'm sure it has an effect. These units are now starting to move forward. These aren't a bunch of strong units right here. Another note, too, is these 464 infantry units of the Germans. At the end of any phase, if those guys had been reduced to their reduced side, if you have another German infantry unit of 2 strengths or a couple of 1-strength infantry units that are adjacent to them or stacked with them, at the end of their phase, you can remove a 2-strength point unit and flip these guys back over to their zone of control side. And that's a plus, because the Germans really, really need this. You don't want to get into a bunch of heavy combats and start taking reductions like I think a few of these did, like right here. Those guys got reduced. Both of them got reduced in there. I think in this stack too, there's a 5 that got reduced. You know, of course, they get replacements to fill them back up, which I'm getting ready to start that here. Those are the top 4 phases, actually. Not very strong up here in front of Leningrad. You got to protect Leningrad, Kiev, and Moscow. 2 of the 3 need to be protected at all times. So I got to get reinforcements there. I'm going to have to do something about this breakout here, although the Germans are going to outrun their supply if they're not careful. Which, does that sound familiar? Seems to me like they did that quite a bit. All right, those are the developments for now. We're getting ready to start the October 41 turn. And as soon as we get done, we'll get it updated and loaded. Talk to you then. Hey, by the way, if you like this, please click like and let me know whether you enjoyed it or whether you didn't. Or I like comments. Tell me what's good, what's bad, what you see that maybe I made a mistake somewhere or maybe I made a good move. Let me know. If you want to keep up to date, hey, subscribe and notify so that you can be alerted whenever I put a new playthrough in. All right, we'll get back to you shortly.